All right. Hello. So we're going to get started. So my name is Sarah. I'm actually from the University of Buffalo. Huge thank you to Brockport for having us today. I was able to come with some of my students today, some of which are even in the crowd too. So thank you for having us. So a little fun fact about me. My background is actually in history. So before I started working in higher education, I was a history major. And I'm really passionate about the 19th century. I can go on for days and days and days, so I won't do that to you. But when I first came across this conference and I knew my students were interested and I wanted to come as well, I was trying to think about how can I bridge my passion for history and my study in history and bridge it together with leadership, because I actually work in a leadership office at the University of Buffalo. So this is what I came up with. This is kind of a pilot run. So as we get to the end of this workshop, if you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. Because when I first started this, I'm like, I think this will work. We're going to find out. But today, my title, Decoding Classical Power, 19th Century Black Leadership and Contemporary Responses. What we're going to kind of talk about is the classics curriculum, which was really important to higher education institutions in the 19th century. When I say classics, I mean Greco-Roman literature, history, and the Black intellectuals who studied the classics, mastered the classics, and ended up using this classics platform to advocate for Black civil liberties, especially after the American Civil War. Now, classics, it's contentious. If you follow the news, you might see the classical learning test in Florida, which is trying to take over the ACT and the SAT. You might see that Plato was banned from Texas A&M because Plato talked about having more than two genders. So it's definitely in the field right now, so I think it's a really relevant topic at the same time. So a little bit of a workshop overview. This is the agenda for today. We're going to start with the Changemaker's Dilemma. I actually used AI to come up with the title. I'm actually not that creative, I'm sorry. But we're going to start with the Changemaker's Dilemma. So you see some posters around the room. Those will make sense soon. Then I'm going to give you some historical context on one of the two figures we're looking at today. So the two figures is William Sanders Scarborough and Anna Julia Cooper. They both were kind of in their prime at the same time. They both knew each other as well. They were part of this Black intellectual circle that really was building up after the American Civil War. So we'll talk about Scarborough. We'll look at some of Scarborough's writings, and then we're going to talk about Cooper. We'll look at some of her writings, and we're going to see what kind of information about leadership and leadership in an oppressive system, and especially an oppressive system. We're talking post-American Civil War, right? There was a lot happening in that period. What does leadership look like after that kind of situation, and what kind of lessons can you pull from them that you can apply to the present? I always like to give a little caveat, though. When you study history, it's hard to understand why historical figures make the decisions they do. And that's because they're talking from that time period, not this time period. So they might make some decisions where you're like, whoa, I don't know. This doesn't feel very, very 2026 to me. Because it wasn't 2026 when they did this. This was, like the 1890s and things like that. So just kind of keep that a little bit in mind. Then I'll have you do some reflections and we'll wrap up and I'll send you on your way to lunch. So some of my learning objectives today, a lot of them are history-based. Again, my background's in history. I have to sprinkle it in there. But I also want you to think about the strategies that these two historical figures use to try to make change in the situations that they found themselves in. And we're going to be doing this primarily through like rhetorical analysis. So we're going to be looking at their writing. I swear, I'm going to try to make this as fun as possible and not as like English class in high school. And some questions I want us to kind of have floating in the back of our mind today. It's honestly three main questions, even though there's four up there. It's how do you work within an existing structure that's an oppressive system? Can you build an alternative structure that is going beyond this oppressive system you find yourself in? Or can you work alongside? And Cooper and Scarborough, they did different things in different situations, as we're going to see. Now, is one better than the other? I don't know, and I'm not about to tell you either. And by the end of this presentation, maybe you will, maybe you think one is, maybe it's not. I don't know. But then something else I want you to think of, especially when we think of something like the classics curriculum. There is a dominance from white academia in classics. We saw it in the 19th century, you really much see it today too. So does radical transformation risk alienating key decision makers and influences? And should this matter? Should you have to appeal to a dominant presence in order to make that change? That's going to feel weird. And we're going to talk about that. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. I'm just going to kind of show you what happened in the 19th century and let that inform what you're going to do in the present. So the changemaker's dilemma. We have four corners. kind of corners. Work within is one of our corners. Build an alternative is another one. Both/alongside is one. And not sure. I'm going to read you a prompt that is going to be relevant to a higher education institution. And I want you to pick a corner. Now, this is your knee-jerk reaction. You hear this prompt, don't think, pick the first thing you want to go with. Take a minute to chat with the other students in your chosen corner. I might ask for some people to share like what they thought about when they were kind of going to their corner. And we're going to revisit this, so remember it. Does this make sense before we start? All right, let me just find my prompt. Give me 1 second. All right, knee-jerk reaction. Your university student government controls significant funding for student organizations. LGBTQ+ organizations receive 30% less funding than other groups, and the application process includes rather biased questions. The student government president is sympathetic, but is worried about the pushback that conservative alumni donors might have. Choose your corner. What do you do? Yes. So your university student government controls significant funding for student organizations. LGBTQ+ organizations receive 30% less funding than other groups, and the application process includes biased questions. The student government president is rather sympathetic, but worried about pushback from conservative alumni donors. Are you going to work within the system you find yourself in? Are you going to try to build an alternative path forward? Are you not sure what you want to do in this situation? Or are you going to try to work alongside what the president's doing? Pick your corner. Knee-jerk reaction. And once you pick a corner, feel free to kind of chat a little bit with the students. I'll give you guys 1 minute to chat amongst yourself before I look for volunteers. It's okay, you guys can talk now. It's very quiet. You may chat. Fair. So knee-jerk reaction, your LGBTQ+ funding is receiving 30% less funding. You have a student government that like kind of cares but kind of doesn't care. Explain to me why you chose the corner you chose. And if you're like, I'm really not sure what's going on, that's also an okay response.
I was on the fence of going from this corner and that corner, just because like it sounds like the president wants to work with like them, but at the same time, like it is obviously like that's not right with like 30% less funding just because they're LGBTQ. I can understand that they don't want it to affect other clubs, but building alternatives to try and like maybe find other donors, or maybe even the donors, maybe they don't even like, what am I trying to say? Maybe it's not as big of a thing as the president thinks it is. Donors don't really mind if it does go there.
Will the donors even know?
Will the donors even know?
I don't know. Are you willing to share why you're representing?
Yes, I said both because with me being a student who has experience with our essay, it's kind of difficult to get funding if they don't agree with what you're saying. And there's ways to work with them, but also there's alternative ways to get funding. So maybe we'll say, okay, we can't do it, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're gonna have a bake sale. So we'll get the alternative funding, or we'll reach out to a separate organization. But we won't do it in a way that breaks essays guidelines. We'll find a way that works within the system, but is an alternative to the system.
Okay, I mean, good to know about bake sales. Are you really, anyone willing to share from this corner?
I picked not sure because, like, as a teenager, like, I've been around a lot of, like, biased people, and, like, even work with them, like, in groups, and they say, like, weird things. So it's just, like, I always told myself, if I know somewhere or, like, an environment that I'm in is biased, I would not work there, I would not be there. I just don't like that type of stuff.
Fair enough. Did you have anything to add, or you don't have to? All right. Do you want to represent your corner?
Yeah, I will. I just said work within because that's where the money is. They control the money. They have the money. You have to try and change their minds. Basically, it's probably more difficult to try and go out and find groups and other people that are going to be supportive. If they're receiving 30% less funding, that means 30% more funding is going to other groups, and it shouldn't be that hard to basically say, this is unfair, this is unequal, you just need to treat us more fairly under university policy and guidelines, basically. So I felt that the best way to get the money is, it's already there, we just need to move it, basically. I mean, as much as I think there are alternative sources, the structures are already there that support you within the university to basically say you're discriminating against my group by giving us less funding than other groups. So it shouldn't be too hard to convince the president or whoever else otherwise on why they should probably just move the money to your group.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing. You can go back to your seats, but remember the corner you chose, and you all chose a different corner for a very different reason. You were going to find that our historical figures, Scarborough and Cooper, are going to do different things for very different reasons, and the one commonality they had was the classics. So today we're focusing on two black educators from the late 19th century, William Sanders Scarborough and Anna Julia Cooper, who faced policies that disproportionately impacted marginalized communities. Again, we're talking about Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction, that late 1800s period after the American Civil War. It's actually much more wild of a period than I think we give it credit to sometimes. We're going to explore three different strategic approaches: working within the oppressive system, so for the folks who went over in this corner, building beyond an oppressive system, for my folks over there, an alternative, and working alongside the oppressive system, which was over here. My not sure folks, maybe by the end of this you'll have an idea, or maybe you're like, I still don't know, and that's more than okay. We'll ask if challenging powerful systems risk alienating the very support needed to enact change, and work through what that feels like. Should you do that? Is that an okay response? You'll read their scholarly writings to see how these strategic choices, working within, beyond, and alongside, appear. And we'll learn to understand how and why strategic trade-offs were made. Why did they make a decision that we don't understand today? And I think Scarborough is going to make some decisions you're going to be a little surprised about. So a little historical context. Before I jump into the historical context, by show of hands, are you somewhat familiar with the period of Reconstruction? My history major, yes. That's good. Awesome, okay. We have some familiarity, but let's talk about it a little bit more. Now, in history, it's really hard to find a starting point to talk about, because it's like you could really go back far on this. But for today's presentation, I'm going to focus on Calhoun. Does anyone know Calhoun? He's kind of a piece of work, I'm going to be honest. So he was the congressman from South Carolina. And he's the one who basically convinced South Carolina to pull out of the Union before the Civil War started. Very racist guy. Now, before the Civil War starts, some lawyers in Boston overhear him talking. And do you guys want the actual quote, or do you want just a paraphrase? Quote? Okay. It's not that long of a quote, but let me just pull it out real quick. Hold on. So according to these Boston lawyers, and this gets published a little bit later, but according to these Boston lawyers, Calhoun said that if he could find a Negro who knew the Greek syntax, he would then believe that Negro is a human being and should be treated as a man. What is Calhoun saying here? He's saying some awful things, but what is he saying? Yeah, I also talk really fast, so if you want me to slow down, just say slow down. But Calhoun said that if he could find a Negro who knew the Greek syntax, he would then believe that the Negro was a human being and should be treated as a man.
Basically, what that means is that, well, back then they thought of us as 1/3 of a person, so they didn't think of us as people. So what he was basically trying to say is that if he could find a Negro that was smart enough to understand what he knew, then he would think of the Negro as a human being.
Spot on, yes. There is this connection between classics and intellectual capability. And that's kind of the surface level understanding of the quote. We're going to dive a little bit deeper, but you are spot on. Classics represented this white dominant culture then, and very arguably still today too. The white, wealthy, educated men tended to go to college. Now, women are getting to college in this period. Black Americans are attending college too. You have Oberlin, which was, I would say, one of the first colleges that was more accepting of different students from diverse backgrounds, more so than the other universities in this period. But people are still getting to college, but it's still very much this white, educated male elite that's getting to college, learning the classics, and using that to justify a lot of horrible things in this period. So, defining Black classicism. Has anyone ever heard of Black classicism? Oh, okay, this is great. Tell me, what have you heard?
Overall, just important works of different authors, like, and also like some of these works are related to the idea of like the Harlem Renaissance.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So, like,
Yeah.
Hughes, Nora. Is it Nora? Is it Sora?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, a bunch of people.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think the Harlem Renaissance is such a fun period. I don't really focus too much on it in this presentation, but like we absolutely lead up right to the Harlem Renaissance. So did someone else raise their hand for it? Did anyone else? Perfect. Yeah, so Black classicism. So this phrase actually goes back a little bit to 1980s, 1990s. So it's actually very recent. So essentially, in the 1980s, there's this guy named Meyer Reinhold, and he publishes this book, and it's called Classical Americana. And he talks about the impact of classics in the United States from the history. We're going 17th century all the way in. And he talks about Benjamin Franklin and the other founding fathers, and they knew the classics, and that's all very true. He talks about the poets like Emerson. They knew the classics. But there's some scholars scratching their head being like, you missed a lot of people in this. And one of those people scratching their head is Michelle Valerie Vronick, and she coins this term. Well, originally she said classical Africana, but in response to the name of the textbook, but essentially Black classicism. You miss the intellectual achievements of Black Americans in this period because yes, they did study the classics, just no one is willing to talk about it, especially in white academia. So this happens in the 90s, and since then, white academic institutions are starting to pick up on it, but like they're definitely lagging behind. So that's kind of the history of Black classicism. Respectability politics. Has anyone heard of this? Okay, some head nods. Anyone willing to share?
So it's mainly, and I'm trying to find the tell the voice,
Yeah, say whatever you want to say.
Mainly just like, well, since you're Black, you can't be yourself. You have to act a certain way. You have to look a certain way. You have to present yourself in a certain way. And if your majority counterparts do something, you can't do it because you're not respectable. And if you do it, then it's kind of looked at as, well, then why did we free?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, I will say respectability politics. There's usually two main arguments behind it. Your argument, and then some folks who will then say, trying to make it a slightly more positive kind of terminology is, well, look at what was achieved when this was happening. So respectability politics actually comes from 20th century looking at history. And it was by Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, I believe. And she was trying to talk about how Black mothers in the 20th century were playing into social norms to try to gain strides in equality and equity. And she was one of the folks who was trying to kind of spin it as they played into these social norms, but they achieved great things. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other with respectability politics. How you feel about this, should someone have to play in the social norms to make a change? That's up to you. Some people might be like, well, the change was made though. The goal was achieved. That was the path taken to get there. Some folks are like, no, too much changing of me to get there. How you feel about it, that's up to you. But this is just very important to the conversations we have today. So is anyone also then familiar with the education debates of this period, classical, arts, humanities type education versus vocational training? Anyone familiar with that? Booker T. Washington versus Du Bois? Oh, yeah. So Scarborough and Cooper are very much part of that debate. So after the American Civil War, we get into Reconstruction and then post-Reconstruction. And education is among the chatter of what's happening. It's around this time that we see states enacting compulsory education laws. That means basically you guys have to go to school. We see a lot of white women in the North being like, I'm going to go down to the South and teach. So you see a lot of white women going to the South to teach. But you also hear some debates. And on Booker T. Washington's side, he's looking at these vocational trainings. It's something that the dominant white culture hasn't really gotten into yet. It's more skills-based, and he's seeing Black Americans do pretty financially successful in it, and that's why he's pushing for it. But then you have folks like Du Bois saying, I can learn the classics. In fact, Du Bois did study the classics. I can learn the classics, I can teach the classics, I can do it just as good as that white man next to me. So that's kind of where that debate's coming from. Washington, Du Bois, they had the same goal of achieving better equality for Black Americans after the American Civil War. The paths they took to get there is what's different. And they both made decisions based on what they thought was the best path forward. Again, is one better than the other? You can't really say that, and you can't really, put yourself back in like that 1890s in the full sense that they were there. But this is just kind of part of that story. So the nadir, has anyone heard of that? Are you willing to share what it is?
Yeah. The way I would classify it as period of American history, most likely of race relations between African Americans and white people, typically characterized by racial violence through racial massacres, Jim Crow laws, segregation, legally enforced and also socially enforced, and lynchings as well are a heavy part of this, and basically just a coercive system that keeps African Americans as second-place citizens within their own country and denies them their basic civil and basic rights as human beings.
You can tell your professor you're doing awesome. Spot on. So I think often, especially when Reconstruction is taught in a high school classroom, because I have that experience, we go, American Civil War happened, but don't worry, we passed the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. We're doing great, guys. And then we just things are great, things are good. Well, let's get to the 1960s with the Civil Rights Movement. Nothing in between happened. Actually, so much happened in between. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, in terms of equality and equity for Black Americans, but you are. I think often, at least through the school systems I went through and for other folks as well, maybe it depends on your teacher, but I don't know if we put the emphasis on the building of civil rights between Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s in the way that they should be portrayed. Now, if you have teachers who are actually doing that hard work, that's awesome. Maybe things have changed since it's been a couple of years, but maybe things have changed, but I got a hand over here.
Yeah, no, for me personally, I am not, I know the Jim Crow laws and stuff, but was not taught a lot of this stuff in high school. It really did what you just said.
Yeah, and some of it's depending on the school you're in, the teachers, the preparation of the teachers, so many factors, yeah.
I would say, at least from working recently in a middle school, Reconstruction is almost like a tacked on unit at the end of the Civil War, especially for middle schools where it's cut off between 7th and 8th grade. It's also kind of even just tacked on in high school as kind of a quick, this is what happens after the Civil War, and they just kind of say magically Reconstruction ends in 1877, and then they just kind of skip to some of the major court cases, and then that's kind of the end of it, and you transition into the Gilded Age and economics and that kind of stuff, and then you get into wars and the Civil Rights Movement just magically appears, basically, the way it comes across and the way it's taught, so.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Well, I was in middle school, we did learn about Reconstruction, but all that they taught us about is how the Statue of Liberty got built, and how they started making buildings in New York City, and how
so much more to it.
Water in the streets, and then my social studies teacher, he was a Black man, so he tried to teach us as much as he could, but it was the curriculum. It didn't include a lot of Black history. It's all we learn about is Martin Luther King.
Yes, and that I think is one of the biggest problems that we see, especially in the K-12 education system. If you guys are curious what you're supposed to be, what New York State thinks you should be learning, the frameworks are published online, so you can kind of see bullet point by bullet point what's expected to be covered in the classroom. Now, teachers do have their own discretion within that. Some teachers run with it, some teachers, they don't. And that could be for, of course, several different factors, but that's why I wanted to bring that up. Especially because I think we heard about the progressive era, right? Things are doing great. We're doing great for the cause of welfare. Yeah, the progressive era and the nadir, they overlap. Things were great, progressive for a certain population. So jumping, and I swear, then soon I'm going to stop talking and you guys will actually have fun with each other. But one more thing I just want to touch on. Coming back to Calhoun's remarks, and again, Calhoun, piece of work. But coming back to Calhoun's remark, he was pointing at the intellectual capability, but it was a bit more than that. there was also this idea that only white people could ever relate to the stories in the classics. And that's not true. And you're going to see that in the way that Scarborough went through the classics. You're going to see that the way Cooper reconciled with the classics. You're going to see that in the way that black authors of this period used the classics in their writings because they enjoyed it. They liked it. It was a curriculum they could relate to. Now, Greek mythology, also kind of a piece of work. Zeus, if you're in the know for Greek myths, you know that there's a lot to it. It's not like it's the best kind of story or literature out there. But the idea here is not just intellectual capability. It also meant something too. Questions? All right. Scarborough, William Sanders Scarborough. So he was born in 1852, Macon, Georgia. And now you'll notice this is the antebellum, so we're not quite at the Civil War yet. He was a child when the Civil War breaks out, and he actually talks about this in his autobiography. And we're actually going to read an excerpt from his autobiography. Yes?
Was he a slave?
This is a good point. This is complicated. So, and Scarborough, if you ever sit down and read his autobiography, you're going to be like scratching your head by the end of it. So his father was enslaved. His mother wasn't. So he wasn't enslaved per se, but he knew about slavery. And if you read his autobiography, and not the excerpt that I'm going to have you guys read, but at a different point in the autobiography, he makes this comment. And again, this is a head-scratching comment. There was good slave owners and there were bad slave owners. And you're like, Scarborough, what gives? Why are you saying that? The person who owned his father sent him to college. Why? I can't tell you. I don't know if Scarborough even knew why. But maybe that's part of the reason he made that comment. And maybe it was a rhetorical strategy because of the environment he was trying to get this published in. There's a lot of different reasons as to why someone says something that is like head-scratching why. He was the author of the first lessons in Greek grammar. Now this was like the textbook of higher education institutions in this period. If you wanted to learn Greek, you were learning Greek from Scarborough. All right? Classics curriculum. This was a curriculum of the white educated elite man. But you have this black scholar who wrote the textbook. He also ends up being the president of Wilberforce University from 1908 to 1920. This is a historically black college, one of the HBCUs. If you're interested in Scarborough, they have like all his writings still. So, do you guys want an example of Scarborough, or do you want to just jump right into the analysis?
Can we still have the example?
Yeah, so I actually took the slide out, but I can actually put the slide back in. I took it out mainly because I was trying to weigh how like deep into this you guys wanted to get. I can go for a while, but I'm just a particular level of nerd, I think, so.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's get into it. I'm gonna unhide this slide just for you all.
Also, it's kind of nice hearing about this because you're actually the first professor I've had who's talked about the positive side of respectability politics. I've only ever heard my explanation.
Yeah.
Of my other professors. This is broadening my view.
Yeah, no, and that's fair because I think the side of how you look at respectability politics, whether you're going to try to put the positive spin on it or not, I think it just depends on a lot of life experiences. I think it depends on how you view the people who employed it. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, though, she's the one who wrote about it concerning black women in the 20th century. And I think if you read her text, it's kind of a really interesting introduction to it. And there's actually a professor, because you're from UB, right? I should put you in touch with a professor in the history department at UB because she actually does a lot with respectability politics in that period as well. So find me after. So let's give an example. So Scarborough is interesting, especially compared to Cooper. So Scarborough, he has this proficiency in the classics. He's really well known in the classics. If you look up newspapers like the Christian Recorder and such from this time period, Scarborough writes the textbook. It's like he's everywhere. And every time he's in the newspaper too, he's like, take that, Calhoun, like come at me. So he has a huge kind of following a little bit as well. And what's interesting about him though, he was very politically engaged. He was really engaged in the classics. Those worlds never met in his writing. If he was talking about the classics, it was, for that classics journal that's being published. If he's talking politics, it's in a letter to Booker T. Washington. In fact, him and Washington had words at one point at a conference in like the 1900s. If you're interested, the Schomburg Archive in the New York Public Library has those letters. It is tea, let me tell you. It's like, I don't know why you're so upset with me. It's like the back and forth. But yeah, he kept his worlds rather separate. Classics gave him this platform. It gave him this name recognition, especially in this white dominant society that he found himself in. But once he had that platform, then he's starting to kind of go to Booker T. Washington. He's going to Du Bois. He's going to Cooper and starting to push for those black civil liberties. This example here, I always found this really interesting because American Philological Association, so you know how each discipline kind of has their like association, the people that kind of make the weird rules about it. There's this Harvard-trained classicist, William Watson Goodwin, and he's in charge of the American Philological Association at this point. And he's like, fate is connected to the gods, it's all over in the literature. That's his stance, and that's kind of the stance everyone in the classical world is taking. Scarborough's like, you gotta go back to the literature. You gotta go back to the original language. We gotta tease out what's really happening here. And this is, I think, one of my favorite quotes from his classical scholarship that he publishes. So this is from a paper on fatalism in Homer and Virgil. And he goes, there are many others equally as explicit that make even Zeus himself powerless, subject to this blind and personal force behind the gods and beyond their power. Another name given to this force is fate. The term fate may refer to the will of the gods, or maybe refers to that unknown power behind them. Take that, Goodwin. When he goes into Homer's writings, when he goes into Virgil's writings, this is what he finds. This zero control over what this hero in the story is doing. And in fact, what's actually kind of fun with his work too, because you know, like the Odyssey of Odysseus is a hero, right? And then Scarborough's like, is he a hero? He also like murdered like 12 people, like just in like one scene. So again though, the point of this example is he is willing to take on this Harvard-trained classicist who's in charge of the APA and say, when I go back to the literature, I'm finding something completely different. How are we feeling? We feeling good? No one regrets coming to this session yet? Maybe by the end you will, we'll find out. All right, so now I'm gonna stop talking and I'm gonna let you guys have some fun with each other. So I'm gonna actually pass out his excerpt. Now this is from his autobiography. And remember, his autobiography was written near the end of his life. He's not actually the one who got it published, it was his wife who got it published. Fun fact, he was married to a white woman, so he was in an interracial marriage in this period. That caused a lot of controversy. It became, yes and no. It ebbed and flowed. Yeah, if you do decide that you want to look deeper into Scarborough, you'll find like newspaper articles like, President of Wilberforce's University, marriage is illegal. Like people had conversations around it. His wife's story is also really interesting too. She was like married to this like Union soldier. He was a terrible guy. She like runs away. Then she meets him. They fall in love, teaching at a school. Like it's kind of hallmarky at the end.
I would say it depends on each state. Typically.
Yeah.
I believe miscegenation would be the correct term.
Yeah. Yeah. So it kind of. But here is an excerpt from his autobiography. I think I have enough copies if you want to take one and pass it down. And I will let you all put yourself in groups since you guys are all becoming friends during this. And in groups, I want you to annotate this excerpt from his autobiography. Look at the tone, how he tries to exert his authority in the classics. Look at the moments where he is starting to engage in respectability politics. And, box anything where you're like, is he really trying to keep quiet on something right now? Okay, thank you. Oh, I also do have pens if anyone needs a pen. Does anyone need a pen? Here, you can take one and pass it down. So, fun fact about this excerpt from his autobiography. So he's in the Rotunda at the University of Virginia. It's 1882, so we're past Reconstruction. And he is presenting this paper and at this meeting in the Rotunda on the classics, on the portraits of Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee, two of the most powerful men from the Confederacy during the American Civil War. And this is what he's feeling in that moment. I love how none of you guys went into a group. That's okay. We're one giant group together. We're just all in this together. In a while, I'm guessing.
Yeah, like
You gotta annotate.
physical paper.
Oh, thank you. How are you enjoying it? Going back to your youth here.
I loved annotating the idea of it, but going back into the books is hard because what I do now is I just section off my writing for discussion stuff. Because we have to read a book for my childhood adversity class. It's damage. It goes about like adverse childhood experiences. There's a book reflection afterwards, and it's like, oh my god, this is the first time I've had to read a full book in college because
That's terrifying.
most of the time you can just get away with like learning like a couple excerpts or like doing a quote or skim reading. This is the one time where it's like, okay, you actually have to understand what you're reading about.
Yeah. Also, did you want to see, they're looking at an excerpt right now. Did you want a copy? Yeah, and this is pulled from Scarborough's autobiography, and he's talking about trying to present this paper on the classics at the Rotunda University of Virginia. And, you know, he has Robert E. Lee's painting and Jefferson Davis's painting, and they're hanging so brightly above him, and what does that feel like for him? Oh yeah, no, you're good. You know, I actually think I'm out of copies. I didn't actually think more than 10 people were going to come to this. We're just looking, though, at an excerpt from Scarborough's autobiography. How are you feeling about this? Feeling good? Okay, are you ready for the Post-it note activity? I have colors. So, as you're wrapping up, the next kind of part of our activity is my wonderful grad assistant over here hung on this side, hung some questions. So on a Post-it note and thinking about the excerpts that you read, I have a question on examples of which Scarborough is proving he belongs in the space. How is he doing that? Questions on where he's maybe holding back on his emotion. Again, this is an autobiography. It was written later in his life. But since the fact that he's writing this later in his life, that means that he is writing this from the platform that he built for himself. Is he holding back on his feelings? I don't know. You'll put your thoughts on the Post-it note here. And then the third part is kind of the emotional labor. What does this feel like, having to do this, to be this tremendously respected scholar, to write the textbook for the Greek language that's used across higher education institutions, and Jefferson Davis is hanging above him? So when you're feeling ready, I'm going to have you kind of jot your responses to those questions based on the excerpt, and just stick the Post-it note right on the sheets. It's all around this pillar here. You don't have to put your name on it or anything, but just your thoughts. So just take one more minute to wrap up final thoughts. It's okay if you don't quite get to every single question. I just want to make sure that we have time for Cooper as well. All right, so take 10 seconds to wrap up your final thoughts. You guys got really into this. Thank you for humoring me. I love this. This is wonderful. I was in a middle school last year. What can I say? And it's nice because you guys aren't trying to throw chairs at me either. It's like this is an improvement. They couldn't actually lift it though. They were too weak, so it's okay. It was more like a shove. It was funny, if anything. Not that I laughed. I was very, very appropriate. No laughing at them. Only in the break room.
He just wants a distraction from the Epstein phone.
But like, what is going on? No, like in general, what is going on?
All right, so, oh, you're good. We can, if there's time at the end, we can get to that conversation. I just want to make sure you guys experience the beauty that is Anna Julia Cooper. So I will take maybe 2 volunteers again, just to be wary of time. 2 volunteers if they're willing to share what they reflected on when they were answering on those Post-it notes.
I did the first one, and like when he was writing and was talking about Jefferson Davis's face, like with like it was like looking down at him, and like because at first he felt like embarrassed for being there because he was like in front of everyone there, and he was like, but like he knows his stuff, like he's supposed to be there, and his face was like, look down upon me with a perplexed, questioning gaze, if not a horrified one. It was a victory for myself in the race. So kind of that like, yeah, I did do it.
Yeah, exactly. That, if not, in a beautiful world, I'd actually be able to meet these people. But like, anytime I read Scarborough's writing and he has like a comment, I'm like, okay, there's definitely like yeah, I did that, guys. That's there. I think flex is the word he was looking for at that point. Yeah. All right. Any other volunteers? One more volunteer?
I mean, he could have said a lot of different things in his autobiography. He really held back. He gave a little sly comment and he left it at that, which I would have liked to see more. It would have been cool to see like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
Take that.
No, exactly. And that's why I think Scarborough is actually often really puzzling, I think, for historians, because it's like he had so many opportunities to be like a little more sass, and he always kept not doing it. And that was part of his rhetorical strategy. That was part of him choosing within the oppressive system, alongside the oppressive system, or against. That's kind of what that rhetorical strategy he's trying to employ there. Ooh. So we did the second part. I'm just going to jump right ahead into Cooper. So a little bit about Anna Julia Cooper, and she's fascinating. She lives to be like 100 or 105, 106, so she lived a very long life. She was born in 1858, North Carolina. She is a Black feminist leader, scholar, and advocate. She's the 4th African-American woman to earn her PhD. So she's wild, because like her master's is in math, her PhD is more in English, and she started it at Columbia and then finished it at the University of Paris. So she started writing her dissertation in English, went to a different country, and then wrote it in French. Yes.
Wait, like Columbia, like in New York?
Yes, Columbia University, yes. This is later in her life. She was in her 60s when she was doing this. So this wasn't after the American Civil War. Yeah, it took a while, but. And then they actually gave her a lot of issues, so that's why part of the reason she ended up going to the University of Paris is because Columbia gave her a lot of a fight, basically. So then she had to rewrite her whole thing in French, because why know just all the languages, right? And then she also ends up being a longtime educator at the M Street School. So I'm just going to quickly breeze through this example just for you guys to have the chance to do some of the rhetorical analysis on her. But have you guys heard of the word intersectionality? Right? Kimberly Crenshaw. So Cooper was talking about this idea way before Kimberly. I think Kimberly is the one who kind of gave us a good word for it. But Cooper publishes a lot. And what's interesting about Cooper, so where Scarborough had his classical publications and his political publications, Cooper's just like throw them all together. Her political writings, she's referencing like Sappho and Plato in her political writings all the time. That's just kind of how she rolled. And in one paper, she has this idea of the race problem and the woman question. And that's that intersectionality aspect coming out, because being a Black man and being a Black woman during this time period was 2 different experiences. Does anyone know why? Yes.
Because back then, take it away from her being Black, her being a woman, like women weren't allowed to vote, women weren't allowed to own their own land and a lot of stuff. So with her being Black, she was like, in their eyes, she was like all the way down because she was a Black woman. So it was just like women weren't treated right, and then Black people weren't treated right, and then it was a bad mix. And then for the man, it was like, yeah, they treated Black men bad, but they always gave men the upper power back in those times. So they always thought of men more better than they thought of women.
Spot on, exactly. And I love that you brought up the voting part. So women don't get the right to vote until the 19th Amendment, right? We're going into the 1900s for this. Now, actually, part of the argument that white women used to get the right to vote was you gave the Black man a vote before the white woman. When did we do that? During Reconstruction. Now, we mentioned the nadir, right? A lot of violence in this period. Just because we have amendment doesn't mean that it's actually being followed. But from a technical standpoint, the 15th Amendment, we had it decades before the 19th Amendment when women got the right to vote. So this is kind of what Cooper's playing at, because Scarborough, for everything he tries to do, Scarborough never talks about women, ever. But Cooper's like, women are here. Women are trying to go to college too. Black women are also trying to go to college. Don't just talk about the black men going to college. Black women, we're over here, we're doing our thing too. And that's kind of the whole case that she makes when trying to argue for their citizenship rights. And when she does argue this in essays, she throws the classics in there because it's gonna grab people's attention. Yes, I know the classics too, and this is my argument for it. So I'm gonna have you guys do an excerpt for the higher education of women. So this is an essay that she eventually publishes in her famous book, A Voice from the South, in 1892. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, there's like a lot of classical references in here. Like there's a ton, like every single sentence. She just went for it. The person I want you to focus on is this woman named Sappho. I gave you a little information about who she is at the bottom of the sheet. Does anyone know who Sappho is though?
Famous poet. Yeah, she sort of like stands out as a woman who wrote about loving other women in Greek classical context, which is a bit, well, weird at the time. Gay men were very normalized, but gay women weren't.
Y'all are doing great. This is perfect, spot on. Yeah, exactly that. So she was kind of considered like this 10th muse. She was very prolific in her writing. A lot of her writing actually doesn't survive though, unfortunately. And she was kind of accused of being a woman who tends to love other women, being essentially a lesbian. That's where she was from, the island Lesbios. That's where the word lesbian eventually comes from in the late 1800s. And she got a lot of crap for her peers for this too. A lot of men gave her a lot of crap for her writing and for the type of topics she wrote about. So when you're reading Cooper's kind of excerpt here, same idea, the annotations, and when you're done with the annotations, feel free to grab the Post-it notes, and we're just gonna use this pillar, and this pillar is gonna have their own questions. I'm gonna give you a little less time for this just to make sure that I wrap this up on time. So let's take 5 minutes or so. I'll have you guys all kind of just grab a copy. Once you're done annotating, just grab the Post-it notes and start answering questions. You'll notice that the questions are a little different. And feel free to think about Scarborough and start comparing Scarborough and Cooper together. I will give you 5 minutes for this. So it's okay if you don't get to answer every single question. I just want to make sure that I don't keep you over time.
One question is here, 2 of them are here.
Thanks, Alnaz. And again, she has a lot of references in it. It's okay if some of them are, you're like, I don't know who this person is. Let me show you part of the conversation you're missing. Okay. Yeah. She's showing that A, women have this intellectual capability, that they can learn this classics curriculum too, and that B, they have so much that they can bring into the classroom. Look at what I'm pulling off in my writing as she's kind of showcasing it. I know all your references. I know how to use them. Why aren't you noticing that I have this power too? Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, I spent weeks reading Cooper's essays. The fact that I'm giving you 5 minutes is, again, very impressive. It's okay not if any of this makes sense. I spent much longer on Scarborough than I thought I was going to, so ideally you guys originally were gonna have more time for this. I'll give you 1 more minute. If you don't get to the Post-it notes, don't worry too much about it. I'll ask for just some of your reflecting thoughts, and then we'll start to round out this workshop, and I'll send you guys all off to the panels and to lunch. All right. Anyone have a thought they want to share? Also, if your thought is like, I'm so confused, that's more than okay. Any volunteers? Any just reactions, no matter how far you got? Yeah.
I was going to say, I felt that the whole, even though some of the references were kind of like over my head, I felt that she did a nice job at the end of like tying it all together and saying basically that, especially at the end of that first paragraph, that if women were given the opportunity of an education, they could be so much more than society has constrained them to be as basically domestic house servants. She references, I believe, sewing and like kind of the domestic labor that women are traditionally expected to perform in American society. She says, if we were given the opportunity of an education like these past people, in the classics, we would be so much more than,
Yeah.
than we're allowed to be.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that's exactly kind of what she's pulling at. Because, and admittedly, the first paragraph and the second paragraph, those don't flow automatically into each other. I don't know if you guys caught that in the citation at the end. The first paragraph is her introduction to the paper. The second paragraph is a little later in the paper, and that's what she's pointing out. The first paragraph is talking about, like, there's these classical authors, and not only, I mean, Ovid's one of the classical authors, but there's other authors, and they're all kind of just reducing women to these emotional beings. They should know what love is, but do they really need to know anything else? And then Cooper kind of jumps to that, and she goes, well, look at Sappho. She wrote about love in her poetry quite passionately. She got a lot of crap for it, too. But think about that intellectual capability that Sappho's showcasing in her work, and that women can bring so much to the classroom if they're allowed in the classroom, because there's these men reading all these classics, and yeah, they're learning different things, but think about what the woman's perspective could bring in there, and that's kind of what Cooper is arguing for. Any other one more final thought, reflection on this?
I like how she mentions like what you were saying about how like the invisible labor that women do. Also how education could be used as a resource and as a weapon, and education is often used as a weapon in the sense of if you get an education, we lose free labor from you. And that's an intersectionality point of, I don't know if she goes into it, of like how women are doing this free labor and how Black Americans did free labor.
Honestly, I'm trying to remember the full essay right now. It's actually pretty lengthy, and it's been a hot minute since I read it in its entirety, but I think she does touch on that. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of my favorite parts of this is when she talks about how she beats her bruised wings against her prison bars. It's like, I'm saying something important. Let me just say it, please. Like, that's, I think that tie-in of like, let me into the classroom. I have it, I know it, give me this chance. Any other kind of thoughts, reflections before we kind of speed through to wrap this up? All right, you guys are.
She said,
Yeah.
finally, that if women were permitted to read,
Sophocles? He was a Greek author.
how you say that name, and work with, how you say that?
Logarithms?
Logarithms, or to nibble at any side of the apple of knowledge, and there will be an end forever to their sewing on buttons and embroidering slippers.
What are your thoughts on that?
Like, she was just saying that, like, if they read like more stuff and got more knowledge and like was interested in other things, then maybe they could stop like making dresses and being a housewife.
Yeah, exactly.
Open their mind up a little bit more.
If you give them the chance, is kind of what she's getting at. If you gave them the chance, if you let women in the classroom, you would see such a drastic shift. And part of the reason they're not letting women in the classroom is kind of that domestic housewife kind of mentality a little bit there. And again, remember we talked about the intersectionality component. This isn't just white women, we're talking specifically about Black women who have that intersectionality. Let Black women specifically, Cooper is also saying, into the classroom. And the minute you do, education is going to be changed forever. Just you wait. And then she alludes, you know, and then she goes to Sappho and talks about it as well. But
I know we have to wrap up.
no, you're good. The fact that you guys are enjoying this makes me really happy.
I thought that sentence was really interesting just because of the biblical reference of her eating the apple. Like, it even framed women getting knowledge as wrong, even though that's counteracting her message. And
Yes.
in this paragraph, it's like completely opposite of what she's saying. Maybe she just did that to hook readers in, and then she went on and be like, hey, let me in. I'm demonstrating that I can do
Let
this.
me in, I'm beating. Let me beat down the door.
Does she ever talk about religion in any of her other writings?
I would say so. I can't give you a good specific example off the top of my head, but simple answer, yes. And as you mentioned the apple, if you are interested in the connections between like Greek mythology and biblical references, Pandora, Eve. Yeah, there's some fun you can have with that. All right, so I'm gonna skip some of this just because we gotta wrap up, and I'm just gonna skip we were gonna revisit the Changemaker's Dilemma of the Four Corners and see if your answers change. I'm just gonna skip that just because we have like all of 3 minutes left. But let's just go to final thoughts. And I'm not even gonna talk about my final thoughts, I just kinda wanna hear from you guys at this point. How do we feel? And again, this got abbreviated. I had planned so much more, and I talked a lot more than I thought I was going to. But reflecting on what we did, Do we think Scarborough Cooper, with their rhetorical strategies, were they accomplishing what they were trying to accomplish? Do we agree with the ways that they were trying to make these points? Do we disagree with them? Do we agree with how they used respectability politics and how they engaged with it? Is one of them employing, working within the oppressive system, alongside it, beyond? I had a table in which I gave you examples of them doing each, but I will turn it over to you guys. You had a thought over here?
Yeah, I feel like both of them did a very good job of working within to get out of the system, and they were doing it within a scope of they don't want to not publish things. So they're trying to do within that, so that way they can actually still talk about it. But with us talking here, we knew what it was all talking about because we took the time to
I give you guys a lot of historical context, maybe too much. I'm sorry for that, but
no, that's the thing though. They put it in there like that, so then that way it's not like you're totally going against it, but if you actually think about it, it definitely.
Yeah, they're using the classics, so they're kind of within this oppressive system because classics is being co-opted by this kind of arguably, honestly, I'm just going to say white supremacy group, and we see that right now. But then the minute they had that classics mastered, they're making other points, and you are applying to play catch up. Yes.
I would just be curious more, not even from my own thoughts, but what were the thoughts of other African Americans at the time? Because my thoughts on Black leadership at the time often referred more to the William Wards of the world, Louisiana.
Are you okay?
And that kind of leadership through, in some ways, force of arms and violence is the only way to respond to white violence. So I'm curious to see their thoughts and other people's thoughts in the time, kind of intellectually.
Oh, absolutely. No, and that's something that I didn't get too deep into because I wanted to not lose the scope of my original intention for this, because this was actually based on the graduate work I did with my history master's. But I think you're absolutely right. What Cooper and Scarborough are doing, they got a lot of respect for what they were doing, but they also had a lot of people being guys, I don't know if this is it. And you do see that in the education debates with Booker T. Washington, Du Bois, and the other kind of the intellectual field at that period. But yeah, no, okay, it is 12:10. I'm gonna let you go. Thank you for coming to my presentation today.
I didn't even know about all this stuff.
I'm so glad you guys showed up. If you have any feedback for me, again, this was a pilot run. So if you have any suggestions on how I can improve this, please let me know. And if you need anything, feel free to reach out to my email, and thank you for attending.